Hello again. This is All Angles. I'm Yuveka Rangopal. Good afternoon if you've just joined us. Now, the recent looting and rioting has cast a spotlight on the safety of employees in their places of work and what the safety hazards there might actually be. Well, I'm joined now by behavioral expert and clinical psychologist Bradley Daniels to talk about safety and in particular our perceptions of safety after what has happened in the country over the past week. Bradley Daniels, good afternoon and thanks so much for your time. And from what we gather here, our perceptions of safety, what is that perception of safety after what we've witnessed and for many, many people have actually been in the middle of this chaos?
Yuveka, thank you, and good afternoon to the listeners. Thank you to the viewers. Thank you for having me on. So obviously, what we are seeing is that safety is not just about feeling safe. Also starts with physically being safe. And so I think what we've seen over the last week, particularly in South Africa, with regards to the looting and the protests that happened, the physical environment was incredibly unsafe for us as South Africans and for the public. So really, what we are dealing with now is that the sense that the physical unsafe environment causes a lot of distress and disturbance to us psychologically, which then leaves us feeling psychologically unsafe.
So tell us what it's actually doing. I mean, let's admit we've been feeling unsafe for a long time here in South Africa. There was just our crime in general. Then came COVID, and it's an enemy we can't see. We breathe it in, we touch it, whatever it is. We're already dealing with that on one level. And now we have this, where people were afraid to actually go out and can't. They actually can't get out of their homes. What has this done to our psyche?
So obviously what we've been dealing with, for some time, not just over the last year, as you've just beautifully described, there's a lot of sense of different stress factors that are operating at the same time. And a lot of them actually violate and also compromise our sense of safety. So, generally crime is a threat to safety in a society. And that we really have struggled with as a country for a long time and continue to do so. On top of that, we've had COVID, which is this invisible enemy that we have been fighting for all of, almost 18 months at this stage. And that adds on to the stress, because stress is cumulative. So it's not one thing doesn't operate on its own and then you sort of wait for the next thing. It's all adding on top of each other. And so currently we have this additional stress that's been added on in terms of the sense of insecurity. And even though the looting seems to be slightly resolved at this stage, the effects will continue, because when we start talking about possible fuel insecurity, when we start talking about possible food insecurity, that actually, if we look at it, that actually violates us in the most basic of ways in terms of, if you think about one of the models which is so easily accessible to the public as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we talk about the reality that we need to have our basic needs met first. And then the next element will be around having our needs for safety then met. So at this stage, we also feel the threat, whether it's real or imagined, doesn't really make a difference, because if you're imagining that you are threatened in a particular way, it gives us the same kind of psychological reaction, which leads to the sense of arousal in the body, arousal in the nervous system, which then makes it really difficult for us to go about our daily business, particularly where the stress is quite extreme. So what a lot of people would have been experiencing at this particular point in time is just really a difficulty to concentrate on the daily activities of living, such as going to work, performing your job. I mean, a lot of people have told me over the last week the incredible amount of exhaustion and inability to really function because of the fear in which people are living currently.
And that's the trauma that has been experienced as well over the past week, Bradley. And I mean, let's just look at it this way. I mean, the physical violence might have ended for now, and I say that with caution, for now. We're seeing our police minister now out and about trying to quell racial tensions, and that's the other one, is that it's that fear now. It's that fear of, I'm a black person who, for example, lives in Phoenix. I'm an Indian person. Can I actually carry on? When will I be able to live my life harmoniously? When can we do this together? Is that ever going to happen? Or has this taken us so far back, pre-1994, that it's just not going to be possible anytime soon? That fear now, and maybe fear of revenge attacks as well, which is the other one that people are talking about, that's going to sit there very deep and for a long time.
I think absolutely, Yuveka. As we always say, and I think as we have particularly learned over the last year, when all that stress really does, additional stress, it actually adds on to what is pre-existing. So some of these racial tensions that you speak about, they have been under the surface for some time. I mean, we had several outbreaks over our history, and if I think back in terms of my own anecdotal experience, if we think back to just before 1994, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, there was that huge violent outbursts that we had politically. And, currently what we're seeing now is that these tensions are resurfacing in a different kind of way, and particularly where what I'm hearing through the media is that in areas like KZN, such as the Phoenix, and areas like Claremont and so forth, there is this sort of friction that's now suddenly happening because, I mean, the reality of what we've seen, or if I can really be so brave as to say, what we've seen as with the mass and collective eye is that we would have seen black individuals predominantly is what we've seen in the media visuals. Not saying that that's exactly how it is, but that already, in terms of our perception, sometimes will fuel our reaction. Often that perception may not be correct. So obviously what's happening now, there's a lot of irrationality going around at this point in time, which happens to us as human beings when we are experiencing a sense of fear or a sense of feeling unsafe. We really go into a very primitive side of ourselves, which is really around fighting for survival. So it's the epoch of the fight versus flight type theory that we talk about. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people really operating from a survivalist a methodology and also survivalist approach. And I must say, just while I was waiting on the line for you, just watching the current media briefing that we just saw, I really got the sense that Minister Becky Cele really struggled with the crowd and struggled with the crowd who perhaps is being caught in the aftermath. So it's really difficult to try and make people feel safe. Retrospect.
And that's the thing, Bradley. I think that there's quite a trust deficit at the moment. With safety comes trust. And for many South Africans at the moment, it might be too little too late, saying you should never have had to go out there and do this in the first place. What happened to our ideas of whether we were actually safe throughout the week when we saw a lack of leadership, when we saw a lack of action from our leaders? Yes, they may be out there now, but many people saying, well, for what it's worth, the damage has been done. Go and say whatever it is you need to say save face, maybe. But what did it do to our feelings of whether we are actually safe as South Africans in South Africa when we saw that big gap there?
As you said, I think it really, it did much more than just violate our sense of trust and confidence in sort of our government, who really has the responsible of keeping us safe. So it did really violate that sense and that in that relationship. And so a lot of work is going to have to be done in terms of rebuilding that safety. And I think, if you really think about the science of safety really talks about the fact that safety also needs to be simple, needs to be consistent and predictable. In the last week, we really struggled to have predictable messaging in terms of what the strategy was. I mean, I remember certainly in my own personal experience as a South African citizen, kind of wondering over the last weekend, the weekend before, where, sort of the police officials, where everyone was, where all the people were who were meant to, I believe, stand forward and say, we are taking control of this situation because the safety of our citizens is crucial to a democracy. And so that has been really lacking. And so there's going to have to be more than public relations, more than sort of just demonstrating being there after the fact. There really is going to have to be a huge shake-up in the government to be able to make us as South Africans feel safe. Because without the safety, we talk about the economic loss that is already happening just due to the physical loss of all the rioting and all the looting. But there's also another reality. When people don't feel safe, they are unable to flourish. And if we want to flourish as a nation, we need to get the basics of Maslow's hierarchy in place, such as basic needs, as well as the need for safety. Then we can start building on the others in terms of the sense of belonging, and eventually to the self-actualization, which is really what we are striving for as a nation. Really, we need to go back to basics, go back to the ground, and we really need to reconnect and recommit to our nation as a government that, safety is key and that we will be proactive about it,
Yes,
as
yes.
opposed to very reactive, which I think is what we've observed, particularly over the last week.
Bradley Daniels, thank you very much. I think just voicing what many people are actually feeling at the moment, back to basics to help us just feel safe, which is actually our right. Well, the lively